Hey, hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Melody. We talk books over here, and today it is the beginning of the month, which you know, probably, presumably, if you have clicked on this video, means it is time to talk about the books coming out in April. Now, we will get into it very, very shortly, but an important reminder that the end of this month, April 27th, to be exact, is Indie Bookstore Day, which I just want us to have as kind of a reminder in our heads so that as we're going through these titles, you can bookmark, earmark, whatever titles you may be interested in picking up for Indie Bookstore Day. And of course, remember, if you want to refamiliarize yourself with titles that have come out earlier in the year, we have monthly anticipated videos for every month, which you are, shocker I know, allowed to watch outside of release month. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. Reminder, I'm not going to get to everything, so you let me know what you're excited about, whether we touch on it today or not, so that we can all be excited together. So let's go ahead and start with April 2nd. This is an admittedly light new release day, but we do again have 5 new release Tuesdays this month, so we will get to some heavier days for sure. But starting out with books I'm excited about, we have The Jinn Daughter by Rania Hanna, which is an exploration of Middle Eastern mythology, but does have echoes of Persephone and Demeter based on the blurb, which is very interesting to me because I am interested in mythology, but also the idea of the ways different myths have sprung up in different cultures around the world and how they kind of mirror each other and where they may be stemming from in terms of root story, all of that. So I'm interested to see how much of that is here. But then of course, at the end of the day, I'm also just drawn to the idea of the magic here. We have Nadine, who is a mother who is in charge of telling the stories of the dead by eating pomegranate seeds. So you can see a lot of those kind of similarities right off the bat. And then one day the seeds stop falling and she is visited by Death herself, who tells her that she wants Nadine's daughter to become Death, to succeed her in this role. So very excited about this. I love like the kind of gods and mortals exploration. I love the liminal space of an underworld because I love a liminal space no matter where we are, generally asterisk, but this liminal space that is presumably here looks very promising. So I am intrigued to see what this is going to be. To my knowledge, it is a debut, so it is a new voice to discover, which is incredibly exciting. And I believe it's under 300 pages, so I'm very interested in how the storytelling is approached on a structural level here as well, in combination with that mythological feeling and that magic. I'm always interested in how magic can be utilized in storytelling to different lengths and degrees. I mean, that's just the craft of any story, with or without magic, but I think you may know what I mean there. And then another new, at least to me, voice, we have The Lady He Lost by Faye Delacour, which looks incredibly promising for those of us who are going to be searching for books that give us a similar feel to Bridgerton Season 3, because here we have a woman who has been left behind by her childhood crush and friend, and he has been presumed dead for years, only to come back unexpectedly. And in coming back, he finds that his life has moved on without him, including our heroine's cousin, who he was engaged to, having married someone else. And in the midst of all this upheaval, our heroine is trying to start a gaming hell for women, and we know how I feel about a gaming hell, and our hero is bringing business to this gaming hell, trying to make amends to her, and feelings presumably becoming more complicated along the way. But then to further complicate things beyond just the feelings, he is facing a court inquiry because he has been accused of desertion, not just this shipwreck, which does make me think of the nonfiction title The Wager from last year in some ways. But in addition to shipwrecks and gaming hells, we have this idea of unrequited love, friendship taken for granted in some way, a woman who is striking out on business of her own and creating a world for herself there, and a little bit of presumably necessary groveling. So very excited to see what we get here, something to keep on your radar if you are excited about Bridgerton Season 3, and maybe if I have all my ducks in a row, we will talk about this more shortly. With that, we're moving on to April 9th, which is a great release day. There are a lot of great release days this month. There are some fantastic books dropping this month that I am very excited for. The first of which being, and I'm going to have to read it off because it is a nonfiction title, but it is The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality by Amanda Montell. You will most probably recognize Amanda Montell from her book Cultish, and I think she also has a podcast that I admittedly haven't listened to, which which is odd in retrospect. But this book is presumably looking at the idea of magical thinking, says it on the tin, which I am fascinated by because I grew up in the age of The Secret. And when I was on TikTok, which I have pulled back from, I was finding this like rising trend of similar magical thinking, or this idea that you could conjure something just by thought alone, which I have always found problematic. And yet, it is a super seductive idea, especially within a world and a kind of ecosystem where it is so hard to succeed. And so I am just fascinated by this thought process. And then especially in terms of the overlap of Montel's work, the language of it, the way it ties into other kind of scammy things, how it can be a scam depending on how it is being talked about, who is talking about it, what they are selling. There are just so many different angles to this. I'm really hopeful that she will touch on some of the intersectionalities here as well. I just have a lot of hope for this book, and also now being more familiar with her work in general, I think I have better expectations for how we're going to look at things in this book, in the sense that with Cultish, I was expecting us to break down language on a much smaller scale than we really did, which is fine. It's just a matter of expectation. And so here I am expecting a little bit more of a like general exploration in terms of like those overarching ideas. So I think that that will be more successful because I have aligned myself properly with that expectation. Granted, we will see. I don't know yet, but I am incredibly excited about this. This is like everything I am interested in nonfiction, and I have such high hopes. Moving on to probably one of the more anticipated releases of the spring, of which we have a couple this month, so this is the first. We have The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I actually know very little about this book. I know it is historical fantasy, and we are dealing with magic and the Spanish Inquisition and familiars, but I honestly don't have much interest in knowing more before I dive in, and I am incredibly excited to dive in. I love magic. I love the worlds that Bardugo builds. I'm excited to see her build a different world that is again such a deviation from what we've seen from her so far. And I am personally really interested in historical fantasy, and it's not been as robust a subsection or subgenre recently, or at least maybe I have fallen away from it more as well. But the idea that one, we're getting something of this kind of profile, and also the idea that if it does well, it could kind of revitalize that as well, and just the tone of it, I'm very excited for the potential here. So lots of hope. I am sure we will circle back to this with somewhat of a quickness, but we will see. So let me know what you're thinking about this one in particular as well. And then in terms of anticipated sequels, we have The Hemlock Queen by Hannah Witten, which is the sequel to last year's The Foxglove King, which was a nomination for Romantasy in the Goodreads Choice Awards, though we didn't see any real payoff of that romance in book one. We saw a lot of promise, but not the payoff. So I'm hopeful that maybe we'll get some more payoff here, or it could be a long, slow burn. I don't know. But the blurb of this at least really focuses on lore and Bastion, which I find fascinating, because one of the things that has really been keeping my interest in this series is whether or not we are going to see any payoff on that throuple, which is not something I expected to say out loud, but I did, and I stand by it. So if you have thoughts on the romance configuration, the triangle, are we going to see a more Anita Blake-esque solution to our romance woes set up in book one? I would be interested to hear your thoughts. In terms of the kind of, I guess I'm going to walk right into this pun, the lore, the kind of magic of the world, I wonder where we're going to go. It seems like we're going to be expanding on that, but I don't know in what way. The blurb also teases some like character changes in Bastion, who I personally really enjoyed in book one and was such a necessary kind of foil to the other characters in terms of adding some levity while still having that forward momentum. So I will be interested to see what that does for the tone of the book. But yeah, I'm just intrigued to see how we're going to follow up the first one here, if we're going to see a little bit more payoff on that sexual tension, just because. and I stand by it. Moving on, we have The Prospects by Katie Hoffman, which is a minor league baseball romance. Publishing really said, take me out to the ball game this year. This is the first, I think, of some romances set around baseball. We've got another one I'm really anticipating next month for sure, but this is featuring the first trans player on a minor league team who is doing great until a rival from a previous team is traded to his minor league team. And then we've got some butting of heads. So we've got some rivalry, some enemies to lover, some tight baseball pants. I mean, the tight baseball pants may be editorializing on my part, but I feel like it's within the realm of the probable. So very excited for this one. I know I'm not really a sports fan, but I do enjoy a good sports romance every once in a while, and this one has definitely piqued my interest. And then we have what appears to be a new historical mystery series with a romantic undercurrent, The Tumbling Girl by Bridget Walsh. This follows a scriptwriter in Victorian London who finds her best friend murdered, and in seeking help from a private detective, she becomes enmeshed in his investigation into a serial killer. So there is the potential setup for future investigations with this. There is, of course, the setup of the romantic tension between those two characters. It feels like it may be right up the alley for people who like the Veronica Speedwell series. I do have some small question marks, only because it looks like it is just under 300 pages, which is neither here nor there, but in terms of being able to develop everything properly there, because we are dealing with the murder of a best friend, there is a lot of implied emotional weight there, but we'll see. And I am a sucker for this setting, so I am very intrigued. And I haven't added any new like romantic mystery series to my list for a while in terms of what I have ongoing, so this may just be a sign, I say, as I am multiple books behind on the Veronica Speedwell series, but nevertheless. Next, we have An Enchanting Case of the Spirits by Melissa Holtz, which centers around our protagonist, widow Alyssa, who agrees on the eve of her 40th birthday to a tarot reading with her friends and wakes up to see a ghost. In trying to solve the mystery of this ghost, she engages the help of the attractive detective next door, but she also keeps seeing ghosts, which leads her on adventures such as tracking down family heirlooms. But one ghost leads her to discovering some secrets that may be related to her late husband's past, and that potentially opens up some more questions or emotional rawness from her there. So I am very excited about this for a couple of reasons. You could probably anticipate the ghosts part, because I have really been on the hunt for things that fill that kind of mediator void in my life. And while this would be an older mediator, it could potentially make me forget about the adult mediator book, which still, ironically enough, haunts me to this day. Additionally, the idea that we are going to have a heroine that is 40 here is incredibly exciting, because that age diversity is really great to see in romance, especially selfishly as I start to get older. So excited to see what we get here. It looks like it's going to be fun. There's going to be female friendship, there's going to be love, there's going to be ghosts. I'm sensing a winning mixture here, and I hope I'm right. And then, because April is poetry month, we have a poetry collection, Instructions for Traveling West by Joy Sullivan. There is a bit in the blurb that really sticks out to me here in terms of this collection, because poetry collections are kind of hard to distill sometimes, especially if you haven't read them. And it says, first you must realize you're homesick for all the lives you're not living. That little bit I love, and I want to read the collection just on that little bit. But it does continue to say, then you must commit to the road and the rising loneliness, to the sincere thrill of coming apart. Now, historically, again, this idea of traveling west, the metaphor of that, the imagery of that, I haven't been quite as attracted to. So the way they are framing, or it is being framed here, and this idea of self-exploration, this idea of the disquiet of a certain point of your life, which can happen at any time for anyone, right? It's not like a quarter-life crisis or a midlife crisis, which have become kind of cliche, but they're cliche for a reason at the same point, because they are moments in our life where it's easy to kind of sit up and look around and be like, what are we doing? is this the life we wanted? Is this the life we thought we'd have? Etc., etc. So interested to see how that's going to explore that feeling and the metaphor as well. So intrigued, and to continue the travel metaphor, I am excited to continue my journey with poetry, hopefully with this collection and with other collections throughout the month. And with that, we are moving right into April 16th, which has yet another really anticipated release for me, Immortal Pleasures by V. Castro. Am I still reading The Haunting of Alejandra? Yes. Has it accidentally become one of those books that I put down for a second and haven't gone back to? Yes, but not because it's not good, but because the thematic explorations are just a lot. It's dealing with some heavier themes that I needed to sit with for a second, but the writing is phenomenal. And in case you haven't heard, vampires are back, and this is continuing our exploration with vampires this year with an Aztec vampire. And in another Everything is Connected moment, she was a translator for Cortez, which brings us back to You Dreamed of Empires, which, stick around for my monthly wrap-up and we will talk about a little more. So there is that kind of connection there. I love like intertextuality, especially unexpected intertextuality, especially when the intertextuality also involves vampires. And this is a vampire who, verbatim according to the blurb, is an avenger of conquered peoples and is going and kind of reclaiming artifacts. And so in this book, she is in Dublin tracking down some Aztec skulls that are supposedly related to her own history. And in such, she encounters a human horror novelist, but also another immortal like herself, both of which may contribute to finding companionship of some kind. We will see if this becomes a kind of Anita Blake situation or solution, or even a more satisfying than Anita Blake situation or solution. We'll have to find out, but I am incredibly excited for this book. And also let me know what vampires you've been enjoying or are still looking forward to this year, because I'm incredibly excited about all the vampire fiction we're getting, and I'm sure we will continue to talk about it. And then we have One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole. This is a new thriller following up When No One Is Watching. I admittedly still need to read that one, but Alyssa Cole is one of my favorite romance authors, and I have been kind of bereft without a new romance from her for the last, it's probably been a couple years at this point. So I also clearly need to read her thrillers. This book does involve dissociative identity disorder, which is a very hard subject to tackle, I feel like, especially within the realm of mystery thriller. And I'm very interested to see how this book approaches it. But this book involves our protagonist, whose life and career were kind of derailed by her diagnosis. In light of having to leave behind her historic preservation career, she has become the caretaker of a historic home, and then a group of unknowns show up at the home she is the caretaker of, including a known, that known being the man who kind of blew apart her career. And then that man turns up dead, and our protagonist is the prime suspect, and so has to try and figure out what actually happened in order to clear her name. And in doing so, she has to work together with her alters. Now, I do not know enough about dissociative identity disorder to talk about it with the nuance I think it needs and deserves, so I probably won't review this book independently, but I am still very intrigued by it. And again, I really love Alyssa Cole, so very excited to see what this ends up being and what the conversation around it ends up being as well, especially from people who are more knowledgeable than I am, for sure. And then we have Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina, which follows our protagonist Naomi, who is on the brink of moving off of the reservation she grew up on with her current boyfriend and kind of starting a brand new life that she is incredibly excited for. And then her boyfriend shows up dead. It is ruled that he took his own life. She doesn't believe this, and in fact believes that there is something more menacing lurking on the reservation. And so in trying to get to the bottom of this and find answers, she uncovers secrets and has to figure out how to deal with them and whether the answers are worth it. And to read directly from the blurb, it says, Naomi begins to question whether it might be best for some secrets to remain buried. So I am very intrigued to see what kind of supernatural horrific angle this takes, because it does seem to have some horror elements to it as well as the mystery thriller, which implies to me there might be that supernatural bend. And I'm really intrigued by the idea of like the sins of the past, the horrors of the past being made manifest physically somehow. So I don't know if that is what we're going to get here, and I don't want to prescribe that onto it. If it's exploring something in a different way, but I'm very intrigued to see how that metaphor is going to exist within the book and what it's exploring exactly. There are a lot of horrific options, obviously, and what it's ultimately saying. So very, very intrigued by this for sure. Also, another reminder that I need to finish Sisters of the Lost Nation because I started it on audiobook and I just wasn't personally doing well with like keeping track of what was happening when in terms of the audio because my brain just couldn't categorize time correctly within relation to that. So I need to finish it in physical, but very excited to do that as well. And then we have Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings, which follows our protagonist, our heroine Opal, who has just won the lottery and soon realizes that not all things that glitter are gold in the sense that everyone is asking her for money. And so in response to that, she buys a failing flower farm and runs away. Because what else are you gonna do really? But then Pepper shows up to the farm and she claims that she is actually the rightful owner, and so they have to come to some sort of tentative arrangement. For romance reasons, clearly. You're not going to fight it out with a lawyer for romance reasons, unless the lawyer is the romance reasons. I don't know. There may be lawyers in this. I cannot speak to the existence of lawyers in this book, but I do know that they start to live together, but they don't get along. They butt heads. So we have some purported enemies to lovers energy. I'm always a little hesitant on the enemies to lovers energy when it involves being roommates outside of marriage of convenience for some reason. Listen, I don't make the rules in my brain. I am just subject to them. But especially, it might be the contemporary setting. It might be the idea that I'm more likely to have a roommate. And when you have a roommate that you really do not like, the idea of spending forever with them, like there are surely little quirks that are getting on your nerves and just like how they live in general, which is presumably how they will live in general for a long time. I think I'm thinking about this too deep, but I'm excited about this book. So we'll see how the enemies to lovers energy, the roommates energy ends up panning out here, and whether or not there is a lawyer. Why my brain decided to go down that route, I'm not really sure, but we will ultimately find out. Moving on to April 23rd, this is the heaviest release day we have for the month, so buckle up, but I'm trying really hard to be at least slightly more succinct this month, so we'll see if I succeed or not at the end of the day. But the first book we have is The Stranger I Wed by Harper St. George. This is continuing that kind of Gilded Age, Buccaneers energy from romances that we had for reading romances for the Buccaneers, and some of those being Harper St. George romances. So this appears to be a new series I'm very excited about, and this involves a heroine, Cora, whose legitimacy has apparently been a matter of gossip for New York, and she is in England attempting to find a husband thanks to a generous dowry from her late grandmother and a stipulation that she stay far away from New York. But that also offers her the opportunity for a fresh start, that fresh start potentially involving the Earl of Devonworth, who needs an heiress and the dowry attached to an heiress in order to kind of help fund his political bills, which are for the common good. And so they have a relationship. They are attracted to each other more than anticipated, it seems, but secrets on both sides will potentially complicate that attraction and that promised happily ever after, so we will have to see how we get to the HEA on this one. And then we have the newest by Stacey Lee, Kill Her Twice. I believe this is her first book since Luck of the Titanic, and if it is not, I do not know how I missed it. Stacey Lee is one of the most exciting voices in young adult historical fiction right now and has been for a while. Currently for me, I think Stacey Lee and June Her are the two voices I am excited about the most in young adult historical fiction, and young adult historical fiction has traditionally been a genre, a subset that I am incredibly interested in. And so this seems to be kind of a mixture of the historical element with a little bit of a mystery. We have three sisters who are investigating the death of their friend who had risen to be a very prominent Hollywood star and the pride of Chinatown. And in wake of the police not really taking her case seriously, they are trying to track down what happened. This, of course, puts them on the path potentially of a murderer and in the path potentially of a murderer, but it also combines with the politics of Chinatown and the interest in leveling Chinatown in order to put up a train station, and this idea that this murder is being politicized in some ways for that aim. And so it combines this idea of the golden age of Hollywood in some ways with what other history industry was going on at the time in a way that Lee does so well and has in all of her books. Luck of the Titanic, The Downstairs Girl, Under a Painted Sky, Outrun the Moon, all absolutely fantastic. And if you haven't picked any of them up, I would encourage you to. And you know I'm serious because Under a Painted Sky was the first I read from her, which is a Western in spirit. And I still absolutely fell head over heels in love with her work. So I am very excited to see what we get here. Even if, again, the golden age of Hollywood isn't traditionally an era I gravitate to in a historical fiction, but I am also always intrigued by authors that I love opening up these new avenues for me in that vein, similarly to when we read and explored The Siren Queen by Nevo, which explored a similar time period. So yeah, it's the new Stacey Lee, and honestly, that's all I personally need to know. But if we want to continue on with historical YA in realms that I traditionally have loved exploring in young adult, we have Saint Seducing Gold by Brittany Williams, which is our YA fantasy Elizabethan exploration following young Joan, who is a member of Shakespeare's company, and this book will be continuing her adventures as an Orisha and attempting to revive the treaty between humans and the Fae in order to protect the members of London and prevent the Fae from wreaking havoc, because we saw the real danger of them in the first book. I loved the first book. If you haven't watched that Feature Friday, feel free to check it out. I think it's a wonderfully fun exploration with a lot of gravity and appeal in terms of like romance, but still a lot of levity and ease of reading in terms of its length and its language, especially when we're talking about the YA landscape and market right now. I think it is an excellent bridge for readers who are looking for just like a bump up from like the Percy Jackson or Rick Riordan-esque explorations, especially as it's still looking at the mythology of the Fae and also introducing readers to Shakespeare in a really approachable way that could pique interest for readers and make it not feel as intimidating, especially because I know Shakespeare was intimidating when I was in school, and I can only imagine with the way language has evolved and unfortunately with what we're hearing reported about reading levels right now, that Shakespeare is probably incredibly intimidating for a lot of readers. So I think that this opens an important door to interacting with that work and to reminding readers what that work was at the time, especially with Williams being a theater person. I think she really imbues the sense of the company and the plays with the tone and the energy that feels right for the time and is exciting. So I loved the book. I'm very excited about the sequel. I cannot wait to spend more time with the Fae and with Shakespeare, and we'll be reporting back. And then, do I even need to tell you, we have a new Emily Henry coming out. Next, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry, which, based on the blurb, I assume the tone of that is more funny story, because the blurb of that. Now, I wasn't cool enough to be granted an ARC of Funny Story, so I will be reading a library copy when I can get my hands on it, but I really like this idea of these two ex-partners, of people that got together on their partners, interacting and potentially fake dating and falling in love. I don't know, we'll see how it pans out, but really, what do I need to say here? You probably know there's an Emily Henry coming out this month. I know there's an Emily Henry coming out this month. If you didn't know, now you know, and get on that library hold because it's going to be long. Next, we have A Letter to the Luminous Deep by Sylvie Catherall, which is an epistolary fantasy novel that follows two academics, I believe, that fall in love over their letters and then disappear. And we are left with their siblings trying to track down what happened to them. And so there is some measure of like scientific exploration potentially, but it also seems to imply that kind of cozy historical fantasy feel, which is interesting because this is a world that takes place underwater from what I can gather, which implies to me that it may be more of a kind of dystopian future in some way. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see what this is going to be. I do not think it is mermaids, but I could be wrong, and we'll have to find out together. Next is a book that is perfectly primed to be right up my alley. We have Song of the Six Realms by Judy Lynn. This follows an orphan musician with an apprenticeship for an entertainment house who is offered a proposition by a young duke to basically come and serve as a musician in his home for a year in exchange for freedom. In the real world, that would raise some red flags. As a reader, that opens up so much romantic potential. And then this Duke turns out to be the Duke of Dreams and is a member of the Celestial Kingdom, and he needs our protagonist to unlock some memories in order to stop an impending war. There are monsters, there is magic, there is maybe romance, I don't know, but I'm hopeful, and I am incredibly excited about this. And then we have Reboot by Justin Taylor, which follows a washed-up actor in his quest to revive an old television show, and I'm more interested in the kind of explorations of the book than that plot, to be honest, because we're looking at like internet culture and revival culture and nostalgia culture, and the way the blurb is framed implies to me that it is explored in a kind of tongue-in-cheek, satirical potentially way, and I'm just really interested to see how it's all approached because it is part of the modern conversation, and I think that kind of articulating that and exploring that with more depth is something that I am really interested in, so we will see what it is. And then last for the 23rd, we have a new historical romance from Julie Ann Long, My Season of Scandal. I shamefully don't know that I've ever read any Julie Ann Long, and I know that she is a very popular historical author, so I feel like I need to rectify that. This blurb is reminding me of the Eloisa James I just read, in the sense that our heroine and our hero are both seemingly living out of a hotel, the same hotel, and so I'm just very interested to see what the dynamic of this is going to be. We seem to have a country girl who has come into town for the season and a hero who becomes her protector in some way. There is attraction there, but he doesn't think he's good enough for her for whatever reason and is ready to send her off into a future that does not involve him. What do you want to bet? The future does in fact involve him. So excited to see what this is and to finally read some. I feel like I have to have read something by her before, but I don't know that I have. So we will have to fix that. And with that, we roll right into April 30th and have 3 titles to kind of wrap it up, starting with Truly Madly Deeply by Alexandra Bellefleur. This is the author of The Fiancé Farce. And I'm getting slight X-Talk or maybe even Dating Dr. Dill vibes from this blurb, in that our protagonist Truly is a successful romance novelist, and despite that, her life, including her love life, is kind of falling apart, and the only thing she kind of has on the horizon to look forward to is this podcast she has agreed to do, only to find out that her co-host on this podcast, while very attractive, is a divorce lawyer that she does not gel with. They do not get along, to the point where she leaves the podcast and nopes out of it completely, until he tracks her down and apologizes, maybe grovels a little, I don't know, and soon they go from enemies to friends to something more, as they realize they have a lot more in common than they thought. But as things heat up, Truly is left wondering if maybe they are too good to be true. I have heard great things about this from readers that I trust. I really enjoyed The Fiancé Farce. I believe this book has bisexual representation from both of our romantic leads, which is really exciting, and I'm just very interested to see what we're gonna get here, so very much looking forward to this one. Gonna have to ultimately decide if I want to do this one in print or audio, so if you have thoughts there, let me know. What I have no question on is if I read the next one, it will be on audio, and that is, again, I'm going to have to read it out. The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War, which is the new Erik Larson title. This is following the 5 months between Lincoln's election and the start of the Civil War, and I am very intrigued by this. I'm a little scared of the timeliness of this in some ways, but I think and know it's important. I know that I personally don't have as big a picture view of everything politically that was going on at this time that kind of led to where we ended up, beyond like the broad strokes things, but like the little movements and the little political maneuverings that lead to these big moments, which I think Larson is really good at exploring, though I haven't read him for probably a decade at this point. That being said, and not to be a generalist, but this is great news for Father's Days everywhere. Moving on, and as a bit of a wild card, we have The Book of Japanese Folklore by Teresa Matsuura, illustrated by Michelle Wang. I am, of course, interested in folklore, and I always love having compilations or things that can introduce me to folklore, especially outside of the Western canon. Additionally, my friends and I are tentatively going to Japan this fall. I only say tentatively because I am afraid to speak something into existence. Yes, it may be the anxiety brain talking, but I was supposed to go to Paris in 2020, and spoiler alert, I did not. So hopefully this fall we are going to Tokyo, and I would just love to have a better sense of the mythology and the folklore, because mythology and folklore are just fun. So excited to see what new creatures, what new stories and myths this will introduce me to. But ultimately, that is what we are looking at for April. I feel like I maybe got through this a little easier and quicker than in recent months, but I also could be eating my words in the edit. But regardless, there is a lot of really good stuff coming out this month, a lot to be excited for. So let me know what you are looking forward to this month. If you're planning to pick any of this up for Indie Bookstore Day, which don't worry, we will be coming back to Indie Bookstore Day. You know how much I love Indie Bookstore Day, so we will definitely be revisiting. But for now, that is what is on my radar for the month. Let me know what's on yours. Thank you for hanging out. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, and yeah, bye.